thing we're going to try and squeeze in is a quick discussion about the conscience. This beautiful mechanism that God provided to your soul. So here's your soul. I'll say this is a heterosexual couple, shall we? So that's the soul. And obviously God, and we put God right up here. Now this doesn't mean that God's far away, but I'll put it up there because I haven't got enough space in between. So it's really interesting that there's two mechanisms God provided to the human soul in which you can receive things from God. Now, one of those mechanisms God's constantly provided since the creation of humans. So it's not something that God has restricted in its operation, but something that's available to every human and has been available to every human for the entire of human's existence on this earth. And it also is available to every spirit. So it's available whether you're on earth or in the spirit world, because it's a soul-based quality. So it's something that is available no matter where you are. And that is this thing called the conscience. Now, a lot of people on earth sort of see it as an inner voice saying whether something is right or wrong. So you know how you feel like you're going to go ahead or you want to go ahead and do something, and you sort of feel or sense that, oh, maybe that thing isn't very good to do. All right? So I'm not talking something that's driven by fear. I'm not talking about something where you get afraid of it and so then you think it's a bad idea. But I'm talking about just this inner voice, sort of like a lot of people call it a gut feeling. I'm just going to stop this ringing that's occurring. A lot of people call it like a gut feeling or a sense that determines what is right and what is wrong. So you could say it is what you might classify as allowing you to have moral determination. Well, what's a better way of saying that? Morals are God's truth being shared with you about what's right and wrong, and the conscience is the operation from which allows you to receive God's ideas about what is moral. Right? Now, there is an operation in the soul. There's an actual function of your soul that God created that allows Him to share truth with you. It is, you could say, fortunately, or if you're mind dominant, you could say, unfortunately, only an operation of the soul. So it's not an operation of the mind. So as we talked about on Saturday, as we become more mind dominant, we don't realise it, but in the end we're also closing down this mechanism that allows God to share moral truth with you. So in other words, allows God to say to you, this is right and this is wrong. Now, God's always trying to share with all of her children whether the things they are doing are right or wrong. He's not going to control you after that. He's just sharing with you the truth and then leaving it up to you. Does that make sense to you? And for a lot of people, just the sharing of the truth they don't even want that. So what they do is they close down the mechanism by becoming more intellectually dominant. They close down the mechanism to the point where they can't hear God sharing the truth with them anymore. Right? And Mary and I have done a series of videos, I think they were, interview videos Mary and I did between ourselves. And I can't remember the year. It's some...
I think it might be in the forgiveness series.
It might be in the forgiveness and repentance series.
Yes, there's a whole section on the conscience.
There's a whole section on there on the conscience, and it explains in more details what the conscience is, how it works, and what its restrictions are, why it gets restricted in humanity, and what you can do about that. So all of that information is there on those videos. In amongst there's a whole series of about 13 videos, I think, on forgiveness and repentance that we did. And I think we did it as interviews in something like 2000 and, who knows. But I think it was sometime 17 or 18 or something like that, 16, but I can't remember. But if you look at that, it sort of describes the full functioning of the human conscience and how it fundamentally works. But what we want to talk about right now is you've got this mechanism which is inbuilt, and it's a mechanism that both halves of the soul share in its functionality. So in other words, the whole soul has the function of being able to receive communication from God through the operation of the conscience, but the two halves have a different, the way they interface to that functionality is if the half of the soul has emotional restrictions that they've got on themselves, they might not be as sensitive to it as the other half of the soul is. Does that make sense to you? Because every single emotion you store in your half of the soul, any unloving emotion, that remains stored in your half of the soul, it restricts the operation of the conscience. And the reason why that's true is because your addictions in particular play a part of restricting the emotional flow of information into your soul. And so to some degree that causes restrictions. However, the way to open it is really quite simple. You just have to have a sincere desire to know the truth, God's truth, on a subject. That's all you need. A sincere desire to know God's truth on any subject. So like, you can, and God's not picky about the subject either. So let's say it's something that you might think is mundane. Well, God will have truths that God can share about even what you believe are mundane issues. And sometimes what you believe are mundane issues are actually very significant issues from God's perspective. They have there's a lot of truths that God would like to share with you about them, because there are oftentimes things that we think are mundane or simple or basic that actually have very complex truths associated with them, and complex issues of love associated with them. So God's happy to share information on any subject, scientific subjects, worldly subjects, personality, personal interrelation subjects, whatever you can think of, God's very happy to share with you, because God's desire for you is to have as much information at your disposal as you can possibly have. So that's wonderful, isn't it, really? You think of a good parent would do that, wouldn't they? And have a feeling that they wanted to share with you as much information that can assist your life as they possibly could.